God knows right where you're at. You may feel invisible, but He knows right where you're at. And He knows what needs to be done in your life.
She spent nearly 40 years teaching the broken how to heal. Now, the woman who survived unimaginable horror as a child is facing a nightmare of a very different kind. A quiet, painful exit from national screens. Distressing allegations rocking the Christian network world. A family legacy caught in a firestorm of grief and suspicion. How does a life built on overcoming pain end up consumed by it? This isn't just about a ministry falling apart. It's the heartbreaking unraveling of a woman who thought the darkness was finally behind her. The split heard around Christian TV. Okay, so let's start with the drama that's had everyone talking. In January of 2025, Joyce Meyer's ministry announced they were pausing her long-running program, Enjoying Everyday Life, on Daystar television network. And when we say long-running, we mean it. Meyer's show had aired on Daystar since around 2005, so this wasn't some small parting of ways. This was 2 decades of history gone almost overnight. Her son, Dan Meyer, who serves as CEO of Joyce Meyer Ministries, reportedly sent an email to staff explaining the decision. According to that email, obtained by Religion News Service, he wrote that Daystar had been a long-standing broadcast partner, but that in recent weeks the ministry had become troubled by allegations surrounding the Daystar television network. Translation: Joyce Meyer wanted out, and she wanted out fast. And she wasn't the only one. Around the same time, several other high-profile Christian broadcasters, including Jimmy Evans, Jesse Duplantis, and Lance Wallnau, were also stepping away from Daystar. The network was hemorrhaging talent, and Meyer's exit was easily the biggest name on that list. Daystar, for its part, didn't go quietly. The network posted a statement on social media saying they loved Joyce Meyer and appreciated her desire to see closure in this situation, while also insisting that law enforcement was reportedly close to clearing the network of any wrongdoing. Daystar even added that Meyer's old time slot would simply be filled by programmers from our waiting list, insisting the network's mission remains uninterrupted. Which, honestly, feels like the kind of statement you put out when you're trying really hard to convince people nothing's wrong. But that's not exactly how things played out, because for a network to lose its single biggest, most recognizable name, someone who had represented them faithfully for 2 decades, and still try to spin it as business as usual, that tells you just how deep this crisis actually ran. So what could possibly be serious enough to make Joyce Meyer walk away from a 2-decade-long broadcast deal without hesitation? That's where this story gets a whole lot darker. The Daystar scandal that started it all. Here's the thing. Meyer's departure didn't come out of nowhere. It came in the middle of one of the messiest, most disturbing scandals in modern Christian broadcasting. Back in November of 2024, investigative journalist Julie Roys published a bombshell report alleging that Joni Lamb, the president of Daystar and co-founder of the network alongside her late husband Marcus Lamb, had covered up allegations that her 5-year-old granddaughter had been abused by a male relative. The accusers were Joni's own son, Jonathan Lamb, and his wife, Susie Lamb. According to the Roys report, Jonathan and Susie claimed that when they brought their concerns to Joni, she allegedly discouraged them from going to the police and defended the accused relative, reportedly telling them she'd prayed about it and believed he was innocent. Joni Lamb has denied these allegations, repeatedly and publicly. But that wasn't all. Jonathan and Susie also accused Joni of financial misconduct and what they described as spiritual abuse. Reports emerged that Joni's compensation at Daystar had jumped dramatically after Marcus Lamb's death in late 2021, from around $436,000 in salary in 2021 to over $1 million in total compensation the following year, according to internal documents obtained by the Roy's report. That's more than triple what the network's next highest-paid employee was making. Daystar disputed the leaked salary figures, calling them totally inaccurate, and accused Jonathan of misappropriating confidential documents. The network framed the entire situation as a smear campaign from a disgruntled former executive who was upset he hadn't been named the network's next president. Then things got even messier. Jonathan was reportedly demoted from his role as vice president and removed from the board, had his salary reportedly cut by 40%, lost his company car, and was placed on a performance improvement plan before being fired from Daystar on November 16, 2024. His termination letter, which was published by the Roy's report, reportedly cited deficiencies in judgment and performance. His wife Susie's parents, who also worked for the network, reportedly lost their jobs too. Her mother's position was eliminated entirely, and her father was reassigned to a lower-paying job before eventually being let go as well. Susie herself had her own salary reportedly cut down to a $1,000 a month retainer. And then, in a detail that honestly sounds like something out of a thriller, Jonathan and Susie claimed they discovered a tracking device had allegedly been placed in Jonathan's car nearly 2 years before his firing, something Daystar has never directly addressed. On top of all that, reports also surfaced alleging that Joni Lamb had used a Daystar-issued credit card to cover roughly $100,000 in expenses for her 2023 honeymoon in Los Cabos, Mexico, with her new husband, Doug Weiss, a marriage Jonathan and Susie had reportedly opposed from the start. Daystar has denied ministry funds were used for the trip. So when Joyce Meyer, a woman who has built her entire public ministry around being a survivor of abuse herself, found out what was allegedly happening behind the scenes at Daystar, walking away wasn't just a business decision. For her, it was reportedly personal. But if you think this story is only about a network scandal, you're missing the bigger picture. Because to understand why Joyce Meyer reacted the way she did, you have to go back to where her own story began. The truth about her childhood. Long before Joyce Meyer became a household name in Christian media, she was just a little girl in South St. Louis, trying to survive inside her own home. Born Pauline Joyce Hutchison in 1943, Meyer has spoken publicly many times about the abuse she endured as a child. According to her own testimony, her father sexually, verbally, and emotionally abused her for years after returning home from serving in World War II. She's described a childhood defined by fear and secrecy, not being allowed to go to sports events, parties, or dates like other kids, and constantly making up excuses to hide what was really happening at home. Meyer has said her mother knew about the abuse but didn't intervene, which only deepened her sense of isolation. By her teenage years, she's admitted she was shoplifting and struggling with serious emotional damage, the kind that follows a person long after childhood ends. At 18, she left home and married a man who, according to Meyer's own account, cheated on her repeatedly throughout their marriage. That relationship lasted about 5 years before ending in divorce. It was after that first marriage ended that she met Dave Meyer, an engineering draftsman and Army veteran. They married on January 7, 1967, and they're still married today, nearly 6 decades later. Dave now serves as vice president of Joyce Meyer Ministries. So contrary to what you might have heard floating around online, Joyce Meyer hasn't been through a string of failed marriages. She's actually built one of the more enduring marriages in Christian media. after surviving one difficult one in her early 20s. What she has been open about is the trauma that came before Dave, and how long it took her to heal from it. By her own account, healing from that childhood didn't happen overnight, and it didn't happen easily. Meyer has said in interviews that she struggled for years with shame, anger, and a deep sense that something was fundamentally wrong with her. Feelings that didn't just vanish the moment she left her parents' house or found faith. She's described herself, in her own words, as messed up well into young adulthood, someone who had to consciously unlearn the patterns her childhood had taught her before she could build anything stable. It's that story, surviving abuse, surviving a broken first marriage, and eventually finding stability, that would go on to shape absolutely everything she built next. From Bible studies to a media empire, Meyer's ministry didn't start with cameras and studios. It started small, really small. In the mid-1970s, she began leading informal Bible studies with co-workers, drawing from her own healing journey to talk honestly about pain, trauma, and faith. Those small gatherings grew fast, eventually pulling in more than 100 people a week. In the early 1980s, she became an associate pastor at Life Christian Center in Fenton, Missouri, a pretty rare position for a woman to hold at that time. She started a short weekly radio segment, and people responded. They wrote in by the hundreds, hungry for someone who would talk about pain without sugarcoating it. By 1985, Meyer had launched her own ministry, Life in the Word, operating out of her home with support from listeners. It grew quickly. Her Battlefield of the Mind series, which tackled anxiety, depression, and negative thinking, became a massive success, eventually turning into one of her best-selling books of all time. Then came television. In 1993, Enjoying Everyday Life launched as a local half-hour program and exploded from there, eventually airing in dozens of countries. By 2003, the ministry had rebranded as Joyce Meyer Ministries, with a massive headquarters in Fenton, Missouri, and a media reach that put her in the same conversation as the biggest names in Christian broadcasting. Along the way, Meyer also built out the practical side of her ministry. In 2000, she and Dave opened the St. Louis Dream Center, which combined church services with community outreach, things like a food pantry, an after-school program, and a residential recovery program for men dealing with addiction. Her ministry's missions arm, Hand of Hope, expanded into humanitarian work overseas, including disaster relief and clean water projects in underserved communities. And through it all, her books kept selling. Battlefield of the Mind alone has reportedly sold in the tens of millions of copies worldwide, making her one of the best-selling Christian authors of her generation. What made her stand out from a lot of her peers in Christian media wasn't just the reach. It was the rawness. While plenty of televangelists stuck to polished sermons, Meyer built her entire brand on being blunt about her own mess. Abuse, shame, a failed first marriage, years of feeling unlovable. She put all of it on the table, and audiences responded to that honesty in a way that turned a home Bible study into a global media operation. But with that kind of growth and that kind of money, scrutiny was never far behind, and it eventually caught up with her in a big way. Money, marble commodes, and a Senate investigation. Here's where things get a little juicy. In 2003, the St. Louis Post-Dispatch ran an investigative series into Joyce Meyer Ministries' finances, and the details were, honestly, wild. Reporters found that Meyer had earned a $900,000 salary in both 2002 and 2003, while her husband Dave pulled in $450,000 each of those years. The ministry also reportedly owned a $10 million corporate jet, a $2 million home for the Meyers, and homes worth another $2 million combined for their 4 adult children. And then there was the office furniture. The ministry's $20 million headquarters was reportedly decked out with a $30,000 malachite conference table, a $23,000 marble-topped antique commode, and an $11,219 French clock, expenses that became a punchline for critics for years afterward. The scrutiny didn't stop there. In 2007, Senator Chuck Grassley launched a Senate Finance Committee investigation into 6 televangelists over their spending and tax-exempt status, and Joyce Meyer Ministries was on that list, alongside names like Kenneth Copeland, Creflo Dollar, and Paula White. Out of the 6 ministries investigated, Myers was one of only 2 that actually cooperated fully with Grassley's inquiry. As a result, in March of 2009, Joyce Meyer Ministries joined the Evangelical Council for Financial Accountability, agreeing to independent audits and greater transparency. The ministry reportedly reduced Meyer's salary afterward and changed how she personally benefited from book royalties. Grassley himself publicly praised the ministry for the change. So while the marble commode headlines were embarrassing, Meyer's ministry actually came out of that Senate investigation looking better than most of the others on Grassley's list, a detail that often gets left out of the story. Reports also indicated that following the scrutiny, the ministry sold off several of the flashier items, including that infamous commode, donating them to other organizations, and scaled back the compensation structure that had drawn so much criticism in the first place. It's a pattern worth noticing, honestly. Twice now, decades apart, Joyce Meyer's ministry has found itself under a media microscope, once over money, once over a scandal involving someone else's family. And both times, her camp's response was to distance, cooperate, and course-correct, rather than dig in and fight the criticism. Whether you see that as smart crisis management or genuine accountability probably depends on how much you already trust her. But the pattern itself is hard to ignore. Which brings us back to today, and the question everyone's still asking. After everything, the childhood trauma, the financial scrutiny, the decades of ministry, where does Joyce Meyer actually stand right now? Where things stand now? Since walking away from Daystar, Joyce Meyer's ministry hasn't disappeared. Far from it. Enjoying Everyday Life continues to air through other outlets, including Trinity Broadcasting Network and Lifetime, along with a growing presence on YouTube, her own app, and her website. She's continued hosting conferences and producing new content, and by all accounts, remains one of the most recognized voices in Christian media. But the Daystar saga itself kept spiraling long after Meyer's exit. The network continued facing fallout from the allegations, losing more programmers throughout early 2025. And then, just this year, the story took its most somber turn yet. Joni Lamb, the co-founder and president of Daystar at the center of the entire scandal, passed away in May of 2026 at the age of 65. Daystar's board released a statement mourning her, saying her love for the Lord and for the people we serve shaped this ministry from the beginning. Her death leaves the allegations from Jonathan and Susie Lamb unresolved in the public eye, with no formal legal findings ever confirmed against her. For Joyce Meyer, none of this seems to have slowed her down. If anything, her decision to walk away when she did is looking, in hindsight, like exactly the kind of accountability her own audience has come to expect from her, someone who's been open about her own pain for decades, choosing not to stay silent when it mattered. That distinction matters because leaving Daystar didn't mean Joyce Meyer was abandoning Christian television or retreating from public ministry. She was separating herself from one specific network while continuing the work that had defined her career for decades. And, considering how closely her name had become associated with Daystar, that separation carried a very public message. Loyalty to a longtime partner had limits, especially when serious allegations were involved. For Meyer, protecting the integrity of her ministry ultimately appeared to matter more than maintaining the relationship. It's also worth pointing out how quickly she moved once the allegations came to light. This wasn't a ministry that waited months to see how public opinion would shake out, or one that quietly distanced itself while still cashing checks behind the scenes. Within weeks of the scandal gaining traction, her team had already made the call. For an organization with as much on the line as Joyce Meyer Ministries, decades of brand equity, a massive built-in audience, and a broadcast relationship going back 20 years, that's not a small thing to walk away from. And it hasn't gone unnoticed by her audience either. Fans and followers have pointed to her exit as proof that her message about standing up for abuse survivors isn't just something she preaches from a stage. It's something she's actually willing to act on, even when it costs her. Still, it's a heavy reminder that even the biggest names in faith-based media aren't untouchable. Behind the pulpit, the books, and the television deals, there's still a woman who spent her childhood surviving something no child should have to survive, and who spent the rest of her life trying to make sure other people don't feel as alone as she once did. And when you step back and look at the full picture, the abuse she survived as a child, the failed first marriage, the decades of building something out of nothing, the financial scrutiny, and now a scandal she chose to walk away from rather than sit through quietly, it paints a picture of someone who's had to fight for her credibility more than once. Whatever comes next for Daystar, for the Lamb family, or for the broader world of Christian broadcasting, Joyce Meyer's story is proof that reputations built on decades of honesty tend to hold up, even when the ground around them is shaking. If this story moved you, or if you're new here and want more deep dives into the real stories behind the biggest names in faith, fame, and everything in between, make sure to like this video and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next.